We're actually going to record this for everybody who's currently here. You can come back and watch it later if you want to take notes or things like that. And also for anybody that you know that might be interested in learning more about updating their resume that maybe wasn't able to attend, or, you know, just personal networking in general. We're going to be putting this on our YouTube channel and our socials afterwards. So if everybody, you know, could take a look at our YouTube channel, we're going to start adding a lot more video content on there for, you know, everybody from a professional stance, and also our podcast. Make sure to check those out. Kelsey's going to drop those into our chat as we're going through here. So I'd like to introduce everybody, or have everybody introduce themselves, actually. I'm Derek Abbott here from Portfolio Creative, recruiting manager. And on here we have Kirby and Felicia as well.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
And, you know, September was Update Your Resume month, and we felt like it would be a good time to, you know, have this conversation. I feel like we try to put out a lot of blogs and everything about updating resumes. We get a lot of questions about it. So we felt like this would be a good time to start to, you know, do some like live webinars and discussions around updating resumes, really, you know, potentially creating a resume for the first time. I know in the world of LinkedIn and everything right now, you know, it's easy to update things on that side of it, but, you know, getting back to the resume, you know, the tried and true resume when you're applying to things, you know, it's always an ever-changing landscape of what managers are looking for, and also just, you know, what you feel comfortable about when it comes to updating your resume. So to start, we have some do's and don'ts. And also I want to point out too, like, feel free to ask questions, either, you know, dropping them into the chat box, or if you want to save them till the end as well, where, you know, we'd be more than happy to answer them. You know, I do want to point out that while, you know, each one of us is, you know, a recruiter, and we've been dealing with, you know, hiring managers for a while in different levels, and even just some of more of those automated VMS systems, or, you know, the you know, electronic ones that, you know, they're looking for, you know, keywords and things like that. Like we certainly, our opinions on what we think that you should or shouldn't do with your resumes is not always going to be, you know, 100% all the time. You know, there are going to be certain managers or people that are looking for specific things, but I think, you know, in some of these tips and tricks that we have, I think it's a good blanket coverage of kind of what you should do when you're approaching, you know, completely redoing your resume, updating it, kind of, you know, across the board. So to start off, we have like some do's that, you know, we've all encountered as we've been working with companies. And I think one thing that I run into a lot is I get candidates that will reach out, or, you know, even if it's like, if you're actively looking or passively looking. And a lot of times what I've noticed is that I'll get a resume in that doesn't have the most recent position on it, which is understandable. I mean, admittedly, I think all of us probably, when you start a new job, you're really excited. You had just submitted your resume, you know, you've been selected for the job, started the job. The last thing you're thinking about is like updating your resume. You're not looking any longer. But I think one thing to kind of keep in mind, and I've, you know, in doing a lot of these, I've started to try to do this more myself. You know, it really, whether you're looking or not, I think it's good to always go in and include your most recent job, especially when you start. You know, most people go and will update their LinkedIn with their new job. Treat that the same way you would your resume in regards to, or treat your resume the same way you would that in regards to going back to your resume, putting in, you know, your new title, what some of those responsibilities are, and then over time, you know, keep those updated just in case you do find yourself in a scenario in which you want to kind of, you know, go out there and start looking. I think Kirby and Felicia, you know, I had mentioned that to you guys when you both started recently, to, you know, do it now so you don't have to worry about it later in case, you know, you want to start adding things to it, changing things around. Responsibilities are always changing in jobs too, but I think it's always good to have an updated current job listed on there. Even if you're just freelancing or currently searching, you know, I think that's good to put on there too. It just shows that, you know, you're actively doing some kind of position right now. And that way you're not, the amount of time that like I would have to go back and say, could you put your, your most recent job on there and your responsibilities? It could be a day or two later. And sometimes that's a make or break for getting an interview, really. So I think just being up to date on those types of things is like rule number one. I think it's the easiest thing you can do to just make sure that your resume is current, if nothing else. Another thing that I've found in conversations with, individuals looking for new jobs is listing all your skill sets. And, obviously like computer programs depend, if you're a graphic designer, listing all of the design programs that you're currently using, operating systems. So if you're good at using a PC, but not a Mac, or a Mac and not a PC, maybe both, listing things like that is pretty important, because we even place talent where the client will be, they'll tell us, we have Macs, and if we have somebody who can't use a Mac, like, unfortunately, like, I don't think it's going to be a good fit, because we don't have PCs. It seems like it's something that you wouldn't think about initially as like a deciding factor, but those are good. That might be what they're looking for in terms of like a qualifier for the position. So any and everything that you can put on there, and interpersonal skills, like, negotiating, like for us from a recruiting standpoint, we put negotiating, pay, salary, working in VMS systems, speaking with managers, I get, there's probably a better way to put some of that, but, those types of things that are more intangible and interpersonal skills, and less of just like a actual computer program and just terms like that, I think are good things to include on there. And there's no, you could put as many or as little as you want, but you've seen probably in like even the LinkedIn job postings where they'll try to match you up with the position, and they'll have all the skills that whoever put the job in there is looking for. And a lot of times, they'll match you up with that. Now, those aren't always, the be all end all, but, putting a lot of those types of things that you start to see more of into your resume is just going to help you out long term, because some of those will use matching techniques to some capacity, which there's pros and cons to it, but it's unfortunately how some of the clients are using it right now. So we have to kind of like adjust our resumes to kind of fit that as well. Another thing that I've found in conversations is that, especially if you've worked on a lot of big projects, like even us as recruiters, if we've worked on certain assignments that maybe not related directly to recruiting, but we helped run a webinar like this, that's something to put in our resumes as something we've worked on. If you're a marketing person, if you've worked on big projects, specifically putting what those big projects were. For a client, we did a trade show ads or something like that. Or if you're a graphic designer, putting on, I helped design the annual report for company XYZ. A lot of those types of things, I think, just further help qualify you or showcase your talent. Where it's not to say that that you wouldn't be considered if you didn't put those things in it, but I think these are just further things that can help make you a better candidate for a job over somebody who didn't put them in there. And a lot of times in discussion, like in the actual interview, you would likely mention these types of things. But I think if you start putting them on there already, it'll just help, they'll already know about them. So when you bring them up, they're already like, oh, okay, yes, we've seen that, we saw that you did that. Can you explain it a little bit further, where, we want to hear about that more, those types of things. It's weird to say a little bit, because I know inherently, like, it's hard for us to do this as much, but it's almost like a time to be able to brag a little bit about yourself, the things that you've done. I think a resume, you're trying to, get a new position or your first position sometimes, and anything you can do to kind of brag about yourself a little bit in these, in the work experience that you have is a good thing. It's really what is going to help get you the position, is to help sell yourself a little bit. If you've worked with large companies, I mean, I think it's always good to name them in general, because it's 9 times out of 10 managers are going to find it impressive if you put a name on there. I mean, that would be for anything you're doing, whether it be your resume or just in life. If you're saying you worked at company XYZ and it was a really big company, if you're somebody who works at an agency and you've worked with big clients, I think putting stuff like that on your resume helps set you apart from somebody who maybe hasn't. Those are things that I think are always good to highlight. They may not amount to nothing. The manager that may not be a qualifying factor for them, but I think just listing those types of things, you're hedging your bets a little bit on, if that's what they're looking for. They're looking for big, company or big client experience. Certifications. I know a lot of people typically will already put these on their resumes, but certifications or additional degrees, MBA, not only just put it on your resume, but put it next to your name. If you do like online certifications for certain skills, like Google AdWords has one, they have Google Analytics has one, like list those certifications under your education. Because we've had clients in the past that have asked like, we're looking for somebody who is certified in Google AdWords. And, there may be some people who have, but they didn't put it on there. Or even if you're in the middle of a course that you're going to complete in a few months, like putting that on your resume and putting, enrolled in Google AdWords certification, estimated May 2022 graduation or, completion or something like that. I think those are always good things to put on there because again, they may not put that in a job description, but that may be something that they're looking for. And even with us, there's certain things we don't put in job descriptions, but we know we're ideally looking for that, they're just certain things that may not initially get included in a job description, but would certainly help make you a good fit for the position. And then one thing we've been running into this a lot more actually, and we'll talk about it later on also, but if you do have a portfolio, if you're, a marketing professional that has one or a writer of any kind really, or a designer, if you have an online portfolio, put a link to it on your resume. Most people, I think by now probably do this, but we have certain, ways we have to submit candidates, and it makes it a lot easier to showcase your portfolio if they're looking at your resume and it's already there. They're way more likely to just go highlight it or click it, go to that website right away than have to look around for it. And I would actually also suggest putting it towards the top. I know a lot of people like to sometimes put their contact information at the bottom or in a corner, and that, typically would go down there as well. But I think putting at the top, so it's like one of the first things they see, along with your other, your name and everything, like right under that is always good because that's, that's what they're going to see right away. So they're more likely to click on it immediately and then look at that. And, if you have the skill set type background, whether it be design, writing, marketing to a degree, they're going to, base a lot of this stuff off of your work. And the easiest way or the easiest that you can make it for them to find your work, the better. It's just they're going to have a better impression of you and your work by, not making it too difficult for them to find it. If you don't, and again, some of this stuff, a few of this stuff is not, it's not a hard line by any means. I mean, we see people do some of these. I don't think that this is more of an opinion of ours, but if you talk to other professionals, they may tell you a little bit different. So, I'll be sure to point out reasons why, but headshots. While I can understand the point of including headshots, I think for the sake of resumes, and you imagine like a stack of resumes, and I really include this for like a lot of these things that we put on here, I wouldn't want on my resume to give any manager or whoever, HR professional, whoever's looking to, decide on who to pass along and not to have any reason to say no. So I think things like headshots, obviously I would imagine, usually they'd be professional, but I feel like, you're hedging your bets by just not including one. That way it's not, they're not trying to find some reason to not include it because you had a headshot that they, looked at and they're like, oh, this is like something, that doesn't make them look professional. Or, we all have LinkedIn's, or if you don't, I think that's also a discussion to be had about, certainly get a LinkedIn. 9 times out of 10, if they're getting a resume and they're interested in the candidate, they're going to go to LinkedIn. You'll have your headshot there. I think keep the resume a little more traditional when it comes to that. Again, we've submitted candidates with headshots before. So this isn't some kind of be all end all. If you have one and, it's a professional looking one, I'm not saying get rid of it. I think that that's totally fine. But I would just say, I usually err on the side of not including one, but if it's also a personal opinion on it. Same goes with GPA. I've seen a lot of people include those. I mean, again, it's hard to tell on the other end of who's doing the hiring, what their opinion is on things. So if you get a 4.0 in college and you graduate with high honors, that's certainly an accomplishment. And I think that's worth putting on there. But also, I tend to, and maybe it's the pessimist side of me. I tend to think that like, you don't know what they're going to assume is a good or bad GPA. And so a lot of times, like just not putting it on there because you don't want to, maybe somebody thinks a 3.5 is good and the next person thinks 3.5 is not good. It's hard to say. And without knowing, I think it's just a lot easier not to include things like that on there. But again, if you did get a 4.0 in college, I can totally that's a really great accomplishment. And that's probably something worth putting on there for sure. But I think overall, I would kind of maybe steer clear of it unless, it's a really big accomplishment you want to list on there. Non-relevant work experience. This is a little subjective because if you're just coming out of school and you need a resume, you have to put something on there to fill it out. I think in those instances, like mine used to be, I worked at a public pool as a lifeguard, and then I became a manager. And then I was worked as a valet for a car dealership throughout college. Like when I first graduated, those were the things on my resume. And in thinking back on it, those were good things to have on there because technically I had management experience because I listed that at a pool. There are times where you can definitely pull good experience from those jobs, especially upon graduation. But I would also say, list classes and projects you've done in classes as well, because that probably is a little bit more relevant than the jobs that don't relate to the roles that you're looking for. But as you start to get into your career, eventually take those off of your resume. I don't list those things now because I've been, I have enough experience not to have to list those anymore. But at first you're trying to fill out a resume, when you do have the jobs like that, like let's say you worked at, somewhere inside of a mall, list the types of accomplishments that you did in that role. Maybe it was you got to lead a team as you did a floor set change or, just certain things like that. I think are definitely relevant to put on there. But as you start to get going in your career, you can start to put it down where, maybe if it was like you were initially a marketing coordinator, 10, 15 years ago, you could put marketing coordinator at company XYZ at these dates. And then you don't need to list anything under it if you've got a good amount of information about your jobs under each job, like that have been more recent. Then you can start to list those under there if they are still technically in your area of expertise. But overall, eventually, it's okay to start taking some of those things off of there. It's just a matter of feeling out when that is. And of course, you can always bounce that off of myself, Kirby, or Felicia, or really anybody that as a professional, to see kind of what their opinion is as well. Because I think, it's eventually you'll come to a consensus where you'll feel good about taking that things off of it. Don't use too many graphics in your resume. This goes more towards graphic designers. I see this a lot more with than, a lot of other, skill sets. But there's one thing to make your resume stand out, which is great. And we'll actually have an example of that, I think, in a little bit. But there is also, you're a creative. You want to showcase that you are a creative. When you're imagining somebody looking at resumes, you need to do something to make yours look a little bit different and stand out. But at the same time, you don't want it to be too busy. I was telling Felicia and Kirby about how a few years ago I saw one resume and it was background really impressive, work really impressive, but the resume was and it was a graphic designer, it was a work of art, which is great, don't get me wrong, but those are types it was so busy when looking at it that it would be hard to, we'll look at it and go to the website and really dive into it because that's what we're here to do. But I'm just thinking of from a hiring manager standpoint, they might see that and it's too overwhelming and they'll probably move along from it because it's just there's too much going on. And we'll point out here in a minute why that is, but you have to assume they're not spending a lot of time at looking at resumes. They're going through things pretty quickly. And, and also just from a printing perspective, I know we don't think about it too much, but if someone's printing off a bunch of resumes and then looking at them all, if they're not at their computer or something that has too much graphics on it and is too much color and stuff going on, if they print it off in black and white, it's going to be really hard to see. And if it's in color, it's not going to be good. They're probably not going to print it off because it'll just be you're using too much ink, and it seems like a wild thing to think about, but I've still know of managers that definitely will print off the resumes and like look at them physically versus emails and things like that. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. But there is such thing as like doing a good resume and putting some graphics and stuff to show you're creative without, doing too much. And another thing about, and this kind of goes back up to relevant work experience. We talk about this internally a lot. You don't want to do too many pages, but I will also say doing more than one is okay as well, especially if you have relevant work experience. Like I don't want anybody to think that it has to be one page and so they have to condense the things that they've worked on, because there are really good areas of like explanation in your responsibilities or your accomplishments in each job that need further explanation that you can put in there. And if that means that you go into 2 pages because you have 3 jobs recently, but they all have like really good, things that you want to highlight in them, and it goes to 2 pages or 3 pages, even if it's relevant, it's certainly worth tackling on there. But to do like 4, 5, or 6 pages, I think is just, managers are not going to look at that many of them at this stage. Even I think they talk about attention span as a whole for everybody, whether, you're job hunting or job searching, looking at resumes, looking at videos online, it's all very, very short. So you have to think that, them looking at your resume is going to be a pretty quick viewing before making a decision, or at least before digging into it deeper. And so doing too many of them like typically isn't conducive to them like getting the information they need. So trying to pare some it down. And again, rely on friends, professionals like ourselves, whoever you may know that can kind of help you with that too, in terms of shortening some things up if you need it. And then one thing I've run into that I think there are certain professions where they use kind of the CV format, where it's more of, you list a lot of career highlights all in, the top part of your resume. And at the bottom part's more of just like a really quick timeline of the jobs you've had, where they were at in the years or the time frame that you did them. While that's really good, I feel like that is almost like a good setup for an interview. A lot of times clients may look into that, or managers, I should say, are going to look into that. And while there's a lot of good accomplishments, it's going to be hard for them to place, like, if one of the accomplishments you put on there is really good, but it happened 10 or 15 years ago, they may not see that as relevant, but it's not really like painting a clear picture of what, your current skills are or your background. And I've just found from working with, managers for quite a few years now that they don't seem to be as responsive to those types of resumes. So I do understand there are certain industries where that's more of a common thing. So, I'm not going to pretend to act like it's something that no one should do. But at the same time, I think from a creative standpoint or marketing standpoint, it's probably not the best way to kind of showcase somebody's overall experience and qualifications for a job, in my opinion. Kirby, Felicia, do you guys have anything to add to any of those?
Well, I think we got a couple more slides that may kind of mesh
Flush
with
some of it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think our next one, if I remember correctly, is how many seconds does the average hiring manager spend looking at your resume? I don't know if people want to drop in the chat and guess. I'd be interested to see if anybody gets this. I did not know this personally, but now, like, I swear when I read this recently, I started to think about like, how long do we look at resumes? And I don't know that's totally off necessarily. We will look at them and dive in a little bit deeper than maybe your average hiring manager. So perhaps this doesn't necessarily apply to us directly, but it was definitely a little surprising. And maybe I've just never timed it before. Maybe I should do that actually, just to see how long we usually do it. I see a lot of people putting 20, 38, 80. I think the answer might surprise some people, although I will say Maddie with 8 is the closest by far. What was it? I think it's
7.4 seconds.
7.4 seconds. So
average.
Going back to like what we just mentioned about some of the do's and don'ts, like the portfolio link at the top, not to make it too busy, putting the most relevant work experience at the top. Like if you think about it, I don't have the timer in front of me, but 7 seconds seems like a really short time, and also probably isn't as nearly as short as it seems. But when someone's scanning over a resume really quickly, you know, if you're if you're 2 pages, that's probably fine. Multiple pages, they're probably intaking less of the actual information because they're spending more time going through the entire thing. So I think, you know, that's something to keep in mind as you're kind of going through there and looking at some of that, because, you know, those are definitely things to keep in mind. Not everyone, you know, it's average. So some are going to take longer, some are going to be shorter, but it was just surprising to me to actually see that, because I'd never really thought about it myself, to be honest. Felicia, I think you wanted to kind of chat about the relevant work experience and what to put where also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize in advance if it's triggering to see the little doll from Squid Games, but I thought it was we're close to Halloween, so I figured I'd add that in there. But yeah, just to kind of continue on what Derek's been saying about, you do have this sort of limited space to get someone's attention. And, I don't know about you guys, but I've never earned a job opportunity by my resume alone. So clearly, like, this isn't like the end result of your experience in, expressing yourself about the job, but it is going to be the first impression that you give to somebody. And typically you're not going to have the opportunity to sort of like read your resume out to somebody. So you want it to be organized in a way where somebody's going to pick it up, read it. And if they are only spending 7.4 seconds looking at it, that, when they're skimming through it, they're going to get the most pertinent information first. Then, if they do want to spend a longer period of time, scanning through it, then they can get to some of the other information. So I always like to use this sort of red light, green light, yellow light exercise when I'm going through my resume. And this isn't necessarily just something that you have to do when you're first writing your resume. This is something I like to use every time I go back and edit my resume. When I do start to sort of hit that, get to the end of my second page and I'm like, is this really something that I need a third page for, or are there things that I can go back and edit? I think about the most important information and put that at the top of each one of my job descriptions. So these are things that are most important to the role that you're applying to. I sometimes like to look at the job description of the role that I'm applying to and look for words that match some of the things that I'm doing currently in my position, and make sure that those are highlighted in the top of that description. And then when I'm looking at other bullet points to put underneath, the next thing that I would put underneath is probably something that relates to soft skills that are important to that role. So, like Derek was saying, even if you've just, managed a pool, if it's management experience, that would be something that I would put in that section there, where I would, highlight, management experience, time management, teamwork. If you took on any sort of stretch projects or extra freelance projects on the side, I would include those kind of things there to just show like your character as a person beyond just the main skills that you have, for that job. And then the last thing on there might be some, some extra fun facts about yourself or fun facts about what you did in the job. They might be relevant. They might not be relevant. Typically, those are the first things that I look at when I'm going back to edit, and I'm like, okay, is this really, really important for me to put in my resume? Or is it something that I could leave off of my resume and still, bring up in my interview as a fun fact, but isn't necessarily going to like grab somebody's attention to want to keep reading? Cool. Great. Kirby, did you want to talk a little bit about portfolios?
Yeah, so the portfolios, usually people will have them. It's like if you're a graphic designer and different roles that you have, but it's really important to show off what work you've done, even beyond like a professional setting. So if you had just graduated from school and stuff like that, and doing different projects while you're in school, and you might not have like relevant work experience outside of what you've done, in college, then you can put things that you've done in class that's really relevant. And it's really important to, it's really important to put them, like when you're applying to jobs, there might be certain things that you want to show off that relates more to it, like Felicia said before. But yeah, there's also different websites that you can use as for your portfolio. There's different ones that I've never heard of before.
I want to point out too that I actually ran into this yesterday. Someone was sending me over their the PDF portfolio, and it was too large for me to be able to attach to the system that we had to use for that particular client. And I had to keep trying to condense it. And at the end of the day, I couldn't condense it. And so I went back to the candidate and just said, I can't condense all these PDFs of all of your work, but I want to make sure that they're able to take a look at it. And so they ended up sending me like, I think it was WeTransfer, or sometimes people send like a Google Drive link with like folders and everything. That's always great. I think that's a perfectly fine solution to showcasing your work. And this goes for not just graphic designers, but also copywriters. If you're a marketing professional and you have a bunch of stuff you want to show. But I think, what Kirby put together here about some of these portfolio websites, some are more intricate than others, but I think definitely taking the time to use one of these to put together to showcase your work is really important, because like in that instance, that candidate didn't necessarily have, a specific like portfolio that I could showcase. I wanted to show that work, but if they would have had like a link to this, I could have just dropped it into a comments or put it on their resume, and it would have been a lot easier for the person on the other end to just be able to see that. Now, again, at the end of the day, we got a solution to it, so it's not the end of the world. But at the same time, I think if you take a little time to make one of these, it just, sometimes just from a visual standpoint, it's a lot better. I am seeing in here that somebody mentioned that Adobe has a free compression tool, which I did not know, and I will definitely be taking a look at that, because we do run into this still, and I understand too, sometimes you just don't have the ability or the time to create something like this. But to Kirby's point, there are a lot of them on here, and when she put this together, I was like, I didn't know about a lot of these either, and I've been doing creative recruiting for a while now, so there's a lot of options out there.
Yeah, when I was putting this together, I also noticed that a lot of these websites do offer free or low cost options. So I know that can kind of be, I try to choose things that don't cost a lot of money. I'm sure you could spend, bank on a really fancy designed portfolio, but at the end of the day, like, you're showcasing your work, you're not showcasing somebody else's website. So like, I don't think you have to necessarily like put your life savings into putting together a portfolio. I know Wix.com, like you can make your own website. It's super user friendly. A lot of these are just like very, very easy to use and easy to like showcase your work without, going too crazy with it.
And they're all acceptable too. Like managers they don't have an issue with which one you send over. Like I know Behance is a pretty simple one that a lot of schools recommend and things. When I was in school, we actually had to make a website via WordPress. And I know haven't been in WordPress for a really long time, but I know like myself, who's not overly able, creative when it comes to like being able to use Adobe Creative Suites and stuff, like WordPress was really simple to they give you templates and lay everything out. So yeah, just to reiterate, like there's a lot of options, and some of them are more like making a website versus others that are more of just like showcasing a portfolio too. So I would always recommend look at a few of these and definitely see which option might be the best for you, and kind of go that route first.
Perfect. I think, Kirby, on the next screen, I have an example. So this was someone's resume and portfolio that I just thought was like a really great example of, she added a little bit of, graphics to it. So it clearly looks like she designed it. and she used some of her skills to like make it look really nice. I did want to note that her portfolio link is at the top. It's a different color, so it's easy to see. I don't have to like dig around to find where that is, because when you are showcasing graphic design work, that is the meat and potatoes of what you're trying to show the person who's looking to hire you. So if you bury that link somewhere in your resume and they have to look for it, or they have to go to your LinkedIn profile and find it there, right? Like your main purpose of giving them this document is to help them to see what you can do. And so you want to make sure that that is like clear, concise at the top, easy to find. And then Kirby, if you want to click on, yep, on that right there, it should, I don't know if it'll pop up. There you go. So I just want to kind of show you how she has her portfolio laid out as well. I just thought it was like really cool. She has her latest project at the top. She has everything sort of organized, by project. It's easy to sort of like click on and see more, but even if you didn't have the time to like click on things, you can kind of get an idea of what each project looks like. And so that 7.4 seconds, I think, kind of includes that portfolio scan as well. So you want your portfolio to sort of be similar to your resume, in the sense that like the most important things are at the top and that they're easy to find, so that people aren't spending long periods of time trying to figure out. And then having an about section and a reach out section at the top of your portfolio as well, or on a different page, is also really great, because sometimes while they're on your portfolio, they don't want to go back to your resume and find your email and all of that. And a lot of times you can sort of include like a contact me box on your portfolio itself, and people can kind of reach out to you through that. Really, I mean, there's so many things that you can do with it. If you're a creative person and you're you're able to like figure out all those little things, you could put all sorts of like buttons and bells and whistles in there if you want to, but it doesn't have to be anything more than just a simple representation of your work. So if it's going to take you hours and hours to build a website that you could very easily go on Wix and have it build it for you, certainly don't waste a whole bunch of time on it. But if it's something that will help you showcase your work, keep it interactive and simple.
I think too, like to further your point about making it really, I love the idea of highlighting the actual link to the portfolio. I'm going to have to use that and tell people about that, because I had never really thought about that until just now when we're talking about it. But giving them the advice about that is great. I'm going to start, giving anyone who asked about that same advice. And I think to reiterate, like when people go to that link, making it super easy to find your work, because it's real easy to get into making like an introduction page and stuff as your first page, which is, I totally understand that. That's good to do, but making sure the work is really easy to find. Because if the link to your portfolio or your design work or whatever it may be is really buried in the actual, meat of the website or the portfolio site of some kind, again, the 7.4 seconds, like they may start going through and being like, I can't find it. I'm going to move on to someone who's a little more easy to kind of just see. Also, I did want to point out, if you're someone who does like web design and stuff, I would actually point out that more often than not, I would think that like your portfolio that you're showing, if you're doing a website, like for someone who's doing any kind of web related thing, they're probably going to look at that portfolio link and that website that you've made for your portfolio as an indication of your skill level as like a web designer or developer. So I would say in that instance to definitely put a lot of like, energy and emphasis into that, because we've had a lot of clients that will go through somebody's, portfolio site for a web designer, but then they'll start to find like broken links and stuff. And they'll pretty much come back and say, this professional has really good experience, but they have a bunch of broken links on their website or buttons that I can't find, or, things like that. And they'll essentially disqualify somebody because of that, when, it wasn't the work necessarily, but just the way they got to their work, because it all is kind of intertwined as the same skill set. So if anyone out there is, a designer and working on the website, I would certainly caution putting a lot more emphasis on that portfolio, and your website and things like that. But for everyone else, I think, what we've said is a good starting point, especially.
Yeah. It looks like we've got a couple of big questions that I want to address before we move on to the next thing. Michelle had asked a little while ago, how much graphics is too much for someone who does both writing and graphics? And I think what Michelle is asking is, if you have multiple talents and you have multiple things that you're, looking to apply to, how much is too much of highlighting one over the other? And I would be inclined to say that really depends on what you want to do. If you're trying to apply to mostly graphic design roles, then, I would make your resume very, very centered towards that graphic design role. If you're also applying to copywriter roles or something like that, I would put more of that on there, and you might want to make two separate resumes that you send out for different jobs. You have your writer resume and you have your graphic design resume, and they may be very different from each other. So
yeah, I've seen a lot of people send me resumes over the years that have, whether it be that graphic designer and then one more geared towards copy, or one that's geared towards project management and one geared towards, marketing manager, or, from our end, we'll, from a recruiting staffing company side, we'll keep all of them on file and then use whichever one you would like us to for certain jobs. But I think also, in those instances where, and especially I feel like this day and age, a lot of people do have multiple disciplines. I think having, different resumes for different things is probably a good practice to have, or maybe also having a third one where you're kind of a mix of both. As much as, I feel like we're gravitating towards a lot of the job postings you're probably seeing, and the hiring managers we deal with a lot of times of they're ideally looking for, candidates that can cover a variety of things, more of a mixed bag, or, someone with multiple disciplines that can cover a variety of things. So, those are always good to have. And you're probably going to see more job descriptions out there that you start to look at them and be like, they're asking for a lot of stuff and not all of it aligns. And it's just because they're trying to cast a wider net. But I think if you have the experience and you can make a third one that covers both, I think that it's definitely worth, sending that one over. But yeah, if you've got specific ones that you can tailor to, I get it. It's a lot of work probably at first, but you likely don't have to change those much after you do them. Like I know people in the past have done cover letters where they're going in and changing a lot of stuff and you're almost rewriting a new one for everything. That doesn't have to be the case with your resume. I think it's, as long as you have like two separate ones that kind of cater to each different skill set, you can kind of adjust those as you feel necessary. But at that point, then you just have the two and you don't have to worry about going in and doing anything too drastic or misrepresenting yourself with a more generic one.
Cool. Did anybody want to share a portfolio, a link to their portfolio that maybe we can pull up and show the class? So it's okay if you don't have to, but I just thought this would be kind of fun to like.
Well, and also I want to point out too, like if anybody has like, they would like their resume reviewed or their portfolio afterwards also, certainly get a hold of us and we can, set up time to do that. Or you can just email us that and we can always just email you back as well. I know everybody's busy, so we can help out in that side of things as well.
Perfect. Oh, it looks like Maddie wants to share hers. Kirby, you want to click on that?
Sure. Let's see.
Awesome. We may only have time for one. I'm looking at the time here. I want to make sure we leave some open time for questions too. Oh, nice.
See, here's a good example. Yeah. Of like, as soon as you open it up, depending on what you're applying for, people immediately know which one to click on. I think too, this is good where it's kind of showcasing, immediately the work's there, and then you can click on it and go further into, the project, different aspects of it. I also like how you listed like one, looked like there was illustration under it. Like if you have, this is a good point too, I don't think we brought up, but if you're a graphic designer, and you've got different types of design, let's say some are illustration, some is, you know, page layout and things like that, some's product design, like it's also then separating it out into those, because if you're applying, you know, some obviously, you know, photography, writing, design, there's so many subsets under that of types of things like that, that I think it's always good to kind of break those out so that if the client's looking for very specific types of things, that you can click on those and, you know, that they can go through it and be like, oh, okay, this is where the product design is, things like that. But yeah, this is laid out really well. And I always think too, like putting the contact stuff at the bottom is always a good practice, so that, you know, you may have your contact information listed on there, but also giving freelancing, especially if some, you know, potential client from a freelancing perspective sees your stuff and wants to contact you, making it as easy as possible for them to do that.
Yeah, it is. I love the social media links at the bottom as well. I think, you know, sometimes that's a great way to, your portfolio is almost like the resume that leads to the interview, in the sense that, like, you know, you don't want to overwhelm your portfolio with too many things, because it's going to look cluttered. You're not going to really get to the most important projects. But something like Instagram, where you can constantly post things every single day, and a new project that you're working on, or, you know, something different that you've done, you know, each day of the week, and, you know, somebody wants to see more, that's a really great way of like linking to something that is in real time that you can update pretty frequently and pretty easily. So I like that you have that sort of social media connection there, because, you know, you have endless possibilities at that point.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Maddie, for sharing that. We appreciate that.
And everyone else who shared theirs, again, don't hesitate to, you know, send those over to us, and ask, you know, if we could take a look at them or things like that too, because we're more than happy to do so. And I think, you know, to go back to Felicia's point about the work, you don't want to overwhelm with, you know, whatever work you're showing on your portfolio. And I think keeping the most current stuff you can, you know, updated on there is certainly good. But let's say you've been doing it for 10 years, 2 years even. I mean, you know, it's whatever the amount of time may be. I think always keeping the most relevant new stuff on there is the best. And then, you know, if you're coming out of school, you know, you want to put your class projects and stuff on there, but 4 or 5 years later, you know, beyond, I think it's good to always get, you know, hide or just take off some of the work that isn't necessarily indicative of your skill set anymore. Like, you know, when you first start off, whatever your work looks like, or whatever your, you know, expertise is, your skill level is going to be much different as you continue to move throughout your career. And I think sometimes just, you know, hiding that or taking it off will be good from a, you know, whoever the hiring manager is who's looking at it. You know, you want to make sure that whatever you're showing at the top and the forefront is the most recent, you know, representation of your skill set currently. And I think that's also a good thing of, like, you know, they could always go back if they want to see progression. They can go on to Instagram, or, you know, they can dig further down if they want to. But I think this even goes for someone who's just doing like a Behance. Like, eventually, you know, like we would for a resume, take off some of the older stuff because it's not relevant anymore compared to where you're at now. And, you know, I get it. You know, it's work you've done, you're proud of it. So it just takes over time. It just takes time, you know, to kind of get comfortable doing that, you know, but eventually, you know, I think you'll feel good about, this is the new stuff I've done. It's representative of what, you know, I want to showcase to my client. I'm seeing Ryan's asking, interested in hiring someone for resume rewriting and some consultation, particularly someone with experience in creative. Is that a question more so for potentially writing somebody's resume, or for us to take a look at someone's resume? And maybe that's something you can ask us to, or follow up with offline as well. Like I mentioned, we're always happy to take a look at people's resumes and stuff. We don't necessarily do writing of resumes per se, but we will certainly give like assistance to it. I saw your follow up here. I'm interested in finding someone to write it for you. Anyone you'd recommend? I don't think that I've talked to some people in the past that have done this as like a side profession or a freelancing. We may have to get back to you on that though. I don't know someone off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've spoken to anyone who's like said they've done that professionally. Although I will say I know that people do that in general, locally. So I will take a look, but I would also say like, you know, just doing some general Google searching or even LinkedIn would probably also lead you in the right direction to it. We've thought about offering those types of services before, but you know, we would probably want to partner with somebody to do that. I don't know, you know, if, you know, myself personally would be the best to do that, but we can kind of, you know, we can kind of see what options are out there, you know, and see what the options may be.
Cool. Good question. Great. I just kind of include this slide, but I'm realizing that we sort of talked about it already. I think there's sort of some confusion on generally what I get from candidates is some confusion on, you know, how long should my resume be? Is it too long? Is it too short? And I think if it's the general rule for me is if you are like 5-10 years into your career and you have some really great relevant work experience, and you also happen to, you know, work at a pool when you were in, you know, high school or college, that information at a certain point no longer needs to be on your resume, right? Like if you have enough relevant information and job experience to carry yourself through the resume with just that information, then that should really be the only information that's on there. And that being said, I think if you have like 10 years worth of experience or even a few years worth of experience, but you've had a lot of positions within that time that you want to highlight a lot of information about, I think it's almost good sometimes to have two pages of your resume versus one, because to cram all of that information onto one page, first of all, you're going to miss out on probably some really important information. And second of all, hiring managers are going to look at a 2-page resume, and before they've even read it, they're probably going to think to themselves, wow, this person's got a lot of work experience. They're definitely somebody who's probably a little closer to that senior level position that we're hiring for. And so sometimes just that visual of like having more than one page sort of indicates to that hiring manager, like, okay, this person has some significant experience beyond, just an entry level candidate. So that's been some feedback that I've seen. Clearly there is no cookie cutter manual for this. If there was, we wouldn't be having this webinar today. So, but that's kind of my personal rule of thumb on that. Did you guys have anything else that you want to add about length?
No, I think that was good. That's how I would approach it too. Does anybody have any questions? Any other questions that we haven't covered yet, or general inquiries? I see Kristen asked, for the graphic designer resume example, is that ATS friendly? I've kept my resume basic for that reason, although I prefer to show some creativity also. Should we be sending a PDF versus doc file? I think ATS, that's a good question about ATS friendly. I would imagine so. Actually, I will say this. It should be if you're sending a doc file or a PDF, but I've seen this, it's very rare I see this, but some get really creative. And this probably goes back to maybe like you're doing too much from a design perspective for the resume. If you're sending it as like a JPEG or like a picture file, I've had some candidates do that in the past. I've had to ask them essentially to like be able to break it back down, because that's likely not to be, although like we work with some ATSs for some of our bigger clients, when we submit candidates, they'll give us the option of submitting files like that. But I will say I would err on the side of caution when doing that, because those probably aren't, even though they'll take it as a file, I don't know how friendly it would be personally. And I don't, Felicia and Kirby, you guys, are a little newer, so you may have a different perspective on it, but I prefer PDFs. I feel like with the way we work and we work in Adobe and everything, it's more friendly to a PDF versus a Word, doc file. We have the ability to go in and like, work through that and stuff, but I know, it's probably hit or miss. If you asked 50 recruiters, you're probably going to get roughly half and half on what their opinion is of that. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer. I just think personally, I'd prefer a PDF because the way we go in and take people's information and their contact info and stuff off of them. It just seems to work a little bit better from a reading perspective, but I don't think there's anything wrong. I would say if you've got graphics and stuff on it, it might translate better to be a PDF when somebody's opening it up versus, Word isn't overly intuitive when it comes to like graphics and things. It doesn't, sometimes it will change the format when I'm opening up a Word file to look at a resume, if there's graphics on the top or in the side and things, whereas a PDF, whatever version of it you send is exactly what I'm going to be seeing. Nothing's going to get jumbled around or anything. So I would say that, but I don't think it's like, if you don't have any of that type of stuff on it, then a doc file is totally fine. But if you're trying, from your example, if you're trying to be a little more creative with it, I would say converting it to a PDF. You can also keep a doc file on hand though, just in case.
Great question.
Any others? And don't, again, don't hesitate to follow up with more questions. You can reach out. You can see our email addresses down there. So feel free to reach out and, ask specific questions. Kelsey also dropped in here it's a white paper essentially about about what we've talked about today. It's more of a guide, that you can take a look at when working on your resume. We put it together as kind of a professional tool that you can use as help guide you through the process of creating. But obviously, you can reach out to any of us to ask about it. We've also done some podcasts, or our co-founders have done some podcasts about this type of topic, getting started in your career, a few others. I think we're almost approaching 100 podcasts. So, there's a lot to take in there when it comes to information. But the first 10 in particular are all about networking, interviewing, resumes, kind of starting your career. And, I think those are really good tools to take a look at as well. And, we'll be sending you some feedback or some follow-up like survey stuff. So feel free to let us know, if there's things you would like us to cover in the future, or if you would like to reach out to one of us directly, you can also do it that way. I saw Alexander snuck in one last question here. If you're switching careers and don't have as much experience in the field you're getting into, what should you prioritize? What have you been studying? Personal projects? I think those are good things to put at the top. I feel like, we talk to a decent amount of people who are trying to switch careers and get into new things. I think in that instance, trying to call that out at the top of your resume is good, because again, that's the first thing a hiring manager is going to see. So I think making note of that, sometimes people put in blurbs about like, I'm a professional with 10 years of experience in marketing, and I, like this and that, and this is what I'm trying to do. I think, mentioning that type of stuff, and then maybe highlighting, instead of putting your, your work experience first, put, currently studying at CCAD as a graphic designer, just things like that. Or maybe you're taking online courses, like mentioning those things up top. So that way, whoever you're submitting it to knows that right away, so that they're not immediately looking at the experience part and being like, well, this person isn't a fit for this role because they're, something totally different. I think if you draw attention to that right away, it's certainly going to help you be more in the running for those positions and, get consideration for it. And again, I think there's various things you can do as you're getting into it. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I mean, we've come across candidates like this a lot that are looking to change career paths, and we can certainly, help guide you as you're, kind of going through that. Okay. Well, if no one has any other questions, we will let everybody get back to the rest of the day. But I would like to thank Felicia and Kirby for jumping on here and helping, me with, adding to this, this webinar. And again, check on our YouTube channel. This will be going up soon, and I hope everyone has a good rest of the day.